Happy 2025. Somehow we've arrived at the halfway point of the 2020s. From this vantage point, the 2020s is a decade that future historians will be able to cleave neatly in two. The first half brought chaos, COVID, woke's last stand, and a riptide of change. The second half, well, it may turn out just as messy, but it certainly won't look like the first. In fact, 2025 looks set to be the kind of year that cleaves not just decades, but centuries. Here in Budapest, 200 miles from Hungary's border with Ukraine, we sit at the fulcrum point of powerful forces, of a coming age of empires. Since 1945, America has thrown a protective shield across the continent. Now, as Trump's second inauguration arrives, a new realism dawns. The attention of our great patron is waning. It's a moment that has long been prophesied, but little planned for. The upside might be that the map is being remade, not just at a political level, but at a psychological one too. As global liberalism finally runs out of gas, new solutions, whole new ways of thinking, are popping into existence. And as we float free of the international rules-based order, what can be is increasingly unburdened by what has been. Now, across the continent, a new generation of post-liberal and anti-liberal leaders are gaining the upper hand. But they'll need to act fast. Can Europe change, or is it in for a rerun of what W.H. Auden famously called its 1930s, a low, dishonest decade? The vibe shift and the New World Order, this time on The View from the Danube. Hello and welcome to View from the Danube. Today we're joined by Callum Nicholson, the Director of Research at the Danube Institute, by Liliana Śmiech, Director General for International Affairs at Ludovika University of Public Service, and by Gladden Pappin, President of the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs. Gang, we're here today as the new administration is taking power in Washington, and already since the election, it has seemed that Donald Trump feels like the most geopolitically aggressive president since Richard Nixon. I mean, we'd have him seriously talking about taking Greenland over, buying Greenland. He's been trolling the Canadians into how Canada's going to be the 51st state. I mean, it's a joke, but it's also really provocative. And he's been also pushing hard against Mexico, talking about taxing remittances, things like that. What's going on? How should we read this? Biden?
Well, Rod, I think it's a pretty exciting time in world politics and American politics as well. I think what's happening is it's pretty clear already in the last couple of months that people are starting to accommodate themselves to the fact that Trump is back. No one was expecting that within the last few years until maybe the last 6 or 8 months or so. It really looked like he would not be able to come back. And so I think what we're seeing is a kind of system clash. When they put Trump out of office the first time, they really clamped down hard under the Biden administration. We have to bury Trump forever. We have to bury everything that's associated with him. And they really top-weighted their political and ideological structure in that way. And it's been swept away with all that went with it. And I think you're seeing a lot of people accommodating themselves to that or trying to accommodate themselves to it. People are treating the incoming administration a little bit more nicely. The victory was so strong that the Democrats were kind of vanquished and scattered in the months afterward. Obviously, they're trying to set things as difficult as possible or put things in a situation that will be difficult for Trump to deal with. But basically, they overweighted their ideological and political apparatus. They're trying to accommodate what's coming in, or people are trying to accommodate it. You see a little bit in the Europeans, for example, but no one really knows how, because they didn't have the intellectual understanding of what was happening. They were confident in themselves. It just turned out to be like a roof without foundations or something.
Right. Do you remember that book that was written many years ago by Barbara Tuchman, the historian, called The March of Folly, in which she takes 5 or 6 examples from history about systems or institutions or nations that fell because the leaders were too full of folly to understand what was happening to them? One of the consistent aspects of folly, according to Tuchman, was an illusion of invulnerability in the leadership class. And I think we are definitely living through that right now. As you say, in Europe and also in the United States, the institutional leaders and throughout liberal democracy thought that Trump was a one-off, that they could use the power that they had to get rid of him and all he stood for. And now they stand naked. Liliana?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And you mentioned the accommodation to the, let's say, new upcoming situation or already existing one. But actually, we can already see certain victims of the upcoming situation. And I believe that Justin Trudeau is the best example. I mean, the progressive liberals, they're slowly coming to an end. And I believe there will be more and more of those victims. The first one is him, but who knows who will be in the future.
Keir Starmer, maybe, because of what's happening in the UK. I know we'll get into that later with the grooming gangs, but it is a sign of the total weakness of the institutional system that now suddenly everybody knew about the rape gangs before then. Yeah. But now, I think because of this Trumpian moment, people sense the deep weakness of these institutions.
Yeah, I agree. But regarding the statements, I'm not treating them 100% in this serious manner, because it's like, conquering the space. I believe it is somehow making the people more ready for the upcoming administration. So I wouldn't treat them in this very tangible approach, but I think they are in a way somehow important, because they are directing the way how the future administration might work. So it's like with the President Trump's past statements regarding the 2% of the spending of the GDP on the arms within the members. So
of NATO.
Yeah, of course. So it was somehow, I would rather encouraging the countries to do something about it. So maybe this kind of statement will also somehow, make others more ready to take care of themselves.
Callum, what's going on?
Well, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that it's interesting you mentioned ask whether he's the most impactful geopolitical president since Nixon. I would actually pull back and say there is no precedent for Trump in the post-war era of America. There's no equivalent president. Because you talked about the folly of leaders, and I think what has happened in the post-World War II institutional context of the last 75, actually 80 years, actually as of April this year, we're in the 80-year cycle, one human lifespan cycle since the end of World War II. There's been a sedimenting hubris throughout that period where people believe that answers exist, that we have the power to find them, and that we can act upon them for the greater good. And I think there's a lot of hubris in that. And I think what we're lacking right now, we still have one pandemic everywhere, which is hubris. And I think that what was lacking is the humility to say we don't necessarily know. And I'm not saying Trump is a very humble guy, but sometimes there's a paradox that someone who is personally quite hubristic maybe culturally represents a sort of humility. Because I think what I see Trump's election as is kind of a bonfire of the collective vanities of the West, of the I don't want to make a fire analogy given what's been going on in the last few weeks, but the way I think of it is he's almost burning out the dead wood of the culture. And I think that there is really no equivalent to him. And I think actually the better way to think about Trump is actually in a slightly more imperial manner, actually. And the concept of empire has quite a bad rap these days. But I think in the same way that nationalism had a very bad rap, understandably, for many decades, and then a type of neo-nationalism has re-emerged recently. I think almost what we're seeing is an emerging neo-imperialism everywhere at the moment. If you look at Russia, they've got imperial ambitions. Turkey have been talking a bit about the Ottoman Empire and its restoration, or a form of it. China are quite imperially minded. And I think if you look at what's happening now with Trump, and you look at the statements Trump's been making about Greenland and Canada and so on, I think he's just really engaging with this fashion for at least the rhetoric of a sort of neo-imperial moment. And actually the crucial point in this, the territorial empires, land is back. I mean, for a long time, you mentioned before that the map is being remade. In your monologue, you mentioned that the map is being remade. But there's this great line that the map is not the territory. And I think we've been living for a few decades in a period where everyone is talking symbolically about the map, you know, who are we in a symbolic sense. But I have a sense of what's coming back in is an interest in the actual reality of the territory. And quite literally, with land is coming back.
Well, yeah, and this is how I understand Trump in Greenland. When I first heard him talking about buying Greenland, this was something I believe he talked about in his first term, and it was just a joke, right? Or so we thought. Now, though, I think it's visionary, because with the Arctic ice cap melting, there is a powerful or very important shipping lane opening up in the far north. Greenland is not only going to be important in terms of minerals, but whoever controls Greenland in that area will control that shipping lane. And we don't want the Russians to get it, or the Chinese, although it's pretty far from home for them. So Trump saying something that sounds ridiculous is actually, I think, quite practical and visionary, because I think he sees the world order shifting tectonically in ways that the more experienced normie, if you will, geopolitical analysts haven't seen. You think there's something to that?
I will just add one thing. Actually, I believe that Greenland can be very much important if we look at the critical materials, especially if Europe will stick to its, quite ridiculous climate policy that we're having right now. So I believe it can be also important in this regard. So I don't know, but somehow, you know, there's a debate. There was no debate in the past about the importance of Greenland and about the importance of it to other countries. Now, you know, European Union somehow got interested in it. So maybe it's not actually such a bad thing that we start discussion and we start to actually, you know, think about it in the more long-term perspective.
Yeah, I think even rather than saying that it's just nations or nationalism versus empires, we might say something like the following. There was the terms through which we understood things like the ending of the colonial empires, the ideological terms that was understood in, somehow no longer apply to the present situation. So it's like it was an either or. You had the old European empires. They had colonies, they engaged in all sorts of economic extraction, there was oppression and so forth that went with that. In the post-war era, it's a new day, everything has to be based on universal human rights, and so we're going to end those empires. And what you can start to see with Trump's Greenland comments is, well, there's a new set of interests coming into view, and maybe it doesn't mean that it's the simple rebirth of empires. I mean, maybe we won't see the European powers trying to reconquer Africa, seeking access to minerals again. On the other hand, China is present in Africa through a very different form. It doesn't look like a classical European empire. And similarly, it's clear that some kind of game is going on with Trump's discussion of Greenland and Panama and Canada. Who knows what the endpoint will be of his provocations. We all know that this is sometimes a part of the negotiating strategy, or these are tactics that can be used. Exactly. But it's what is clear is that we're driving to a point where post-colonialism and concepts of independence, although they still function in a lot of parts of the world, if anything, this seems to be the beginning of an era in which national sovereignty itself, particularly as it's perceived by the major geopolitical actors, and the new reality, as Callum said, about the importance of land and minerals in the global competition, is going to lead to some new kind of international political form. We're just not there yet. We're not suited to. We don't have the toolkit to describe exactly what's going to happen. Who knows what the end of the agreement is with Greenland, but we can say that the type of concepts that led to America sacrificing the Panama Canal, which came about in a period in which America viewed that as part of its sphere of interest. It engaged in building the thing, and it was during the period of the heyday of globalization at the end of the 1990s that the sale or the transfer of the Panama Canal was realized, because at that time, well, we all just need to share the same global shipping lanes. This is just another extension of the freedom of shipping, and there had been an injustice done by the kind of quasi-colonial or sphere of interest-driven American way of thinking. Well, what does it look like when that is changed again? I don't think anyone exactly knows. And this too is a emblem of the fact that we're entering an era that none of the post-war institutions had a framework for approaching.
Yeah, so it's the end of the post-war era, but when people say that, they mean that the end of American global dominance, wouldn't you say?
Well, by that, do you mean the end of the kind of rules-based order in America's image?
Yeah. The setup after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah, if I could I mean, I've been thinking about this, and I mean, it's quite common now to say the rules-based order, or to question whether it's coming to an end now, to say maybe it is coming to an end. And I think it is, in the sense that the rules-based order was fashioned very much in the image of the Protestant West post-war. And I think what's being replaced by is kind of just a rule-based order. It's just power, in a sense. But in a sense, that's what it always was. Because if you think about it, the rules-based order was a system which was in America's image and therefore didn't challenge American supremacy and power. Now, there's a certain falseness to that, because there's the sentiment of kumbaya, of the rules-based order, that every state is equal. But underlying it was the reality of American power. And the difference is now, I think, we're a place where power is a bit more obvious. And I think something about Trump that I personally have always appreciated is that Trump is no more or less Machiavellian or power-oriented than anyone else, than Hillary Clinton or anyone else. But he doesn't gloss it with anything else, with the sentiment. He was very direct about it. And I think the reason he's appealed to so many people is that we've increasingly had a world involved in the map, not the territory again, this of the performative virtues of the public sphere. And Trump cut through that. And it's very refreshing, I think, to see that.
Well, on the way over here, I was looking on my phone at a story in the New York Times talking about how Elon Musk and Donald Trump are interfering in European politics now, and this is something new and horrible. Well, if you live here in Hungary, you can only laugh at that, because what has George Soros been doing since forever over here, and what has the outgoing U.S. ambassador been doing? 2 years ago, the head of U.S. Agency for International Development came to Budapest and delivered $20 million to pro-democracy, transparency groups. This was a color revolution, right? An attempt to seed a color revolution. So when you have the Paris newsletter of the liberal order, the New York Times, talking about how, oh my God, Trump and Musk are interfering in European politics, you have to laugh. Isn't that just what you were talking about? That the idea that they're just doing what everybody else did, they just don't apologize for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think both sides have got Musk a bit wrong. I mean, I think on the one hand, I don't think he's, for the people who support Musk, I don't really think Musk is necessarily a solution. I think it's just a new manifestation of the problem of powerful people with a great deal of influence having more influence than perhaps they deserve. But also the people who critique him as something new and special. Well, actually, or a new type of threat, they might see him as. I don't think that's true either, because this has always existed. So it's but Musk has an interesting place in the culture right now. But I think that one thing I think worth noting, and we're recording this 2 or 3 days before the inauguration. Trump right now and everyone around him, the gravity has not been switched on because they're not actually governing yet. So it feels like they have this omniscient presence in the culture that Musk himself is reveling in, having this omniscient sort of, it's the potential power of his words right now. But when they actually come to governing, the gravity will be like clunk, it'll be switched on. and then we'll see actually what the impact actually is, and you'll actually see the internal politics. I mean, personally, I think Musk is the favorite in Trump's court right now. He's a prominent character, but the question is he the prince or is he the jester? I'm not sure, and and I think we'll discover what the reality is when the gravity is switched on Monday.
Well, let's switch over to talk about Europe and what the new administration means for Europe. I can imagine that in Brussels, Ursula von der Leyen and all the others are freaking out because they don't know what to do. The three linchpins of the European continent, Great Britain, France, and Germany, are all at fairly low ebbs right now politically and especially economically in Germany. I talked to a German on a train over the holidays, and he told me that at Christmas, that's the only thing anybody in his family wanted to talk about is the decline of their economy. It's not something they've ever lived with, and now it's there. So what can we expect? What should Europe expect from the new administration? And how do you expect Europeans to respond?
Well, it's a difficult question because we actually don't know what to expect, especially from, looking at the Polish current situation with the very also specific government that we're having right now in power, that it's not it was quite vocal actually regarding President Trump, especially during the campaign, because actually, as you mentioned in the beginning, nobody was expecting that President Trump will be re-elected. And there were very, I would say, harmful voices of different political actors or the wives of political actors that were very vocal about President Trump, comparing him to very rather negative politicians
Hitler,
from the past, So I would say that certain governments in Europe will have very difficult problems actually in getting to the President Trump itself, getting to the people who are working with him, and to actually trying to negotiate things that would be beneficial for them. And I believe Polish one would be one of those governments that would have the biggest problems, because right now Poland has we just started the presidency in the EU on the 1st of January. We took it over from Hungary, and the Polish government put on its list of the priorities security as the most important priority that we have right now. And that's it, security. Very, very generally speaking, that's the security, of course. But how can you have a security as your, let's say, most important priority if your police is totally underpaid, if it's not actually working? So how do you want actually to teach others how to deal with your countries, how to deal with the security if you cannot offer it to your citizens?
Gladden, isn't this good news for Hungary and for Giorgia Meloni in Italy, that now Donald Trump is in office and Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, is famously a supporter of Trump and a friend of his. What role do you see for Hungary, for Italy, and for the other more nationalist conservative parties in Europe? Will they be elevated by Trump?
Well, I think we have to consider, without knowing for sure, how the situation is going to look to this incoming Trump administration. The situation for America's global commitments is not perfect. When we talk about the decline of the post-war world order, the decline of American hegemony, these are things that even in that most powerful country in the world are now being talked about. The Ukraine war has exposed some limitations to American military manufacturing. Since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the American military suppliers and other manufacturers have realized some critical places in which their supply chains are dependent upon China. The incoming administration looks at the situation in Europe as potentially leading to another permanent commitment. Why did Trump come to power in 2016? A lot of reasons, but a big one included dissatisfaction among American military voters, military families, the South Carolina debate in 2016, the failure of the democracy promotion wars by the U.S. after 9/11 was a factor in Trump's 2016 campaign. Sure, talking about it wasn't a big theme this time. It came up a little bit. Trump talked about the failure of the Afghanistan withdrawal. But for sure, they're worried about the possibility of an open-ended commitment. Well, a treaty alliance, as NATO is serious. It's a different type of alliance. It's higher than mere friendship in the diplomatic and legal military type rankings. But nevertheless, there's a sense that America's commitments are overstretched. So the incoming administration, I think its theme will be prioritizing. And Europe is not prepared to be number two. It's not prepared to fight for its place as the number one priority. It's not even clear if the American policy of the last few years has really been beneficial for most European countries, which we were talking about Germany just a second ago, have been left in a state of economic disrepair. So maybe the best outcome would be that America comes to a sense of what its national priorities are, and European member states also come to a sense of what their actual national priorities are, not just as vassals of the US or members of the European system, but that there's actually some strategic discourse, some reflection, some new thinking. As we said at the beginning, that's lacking now. The tools for it are lacking. Hopefully, the reality of a jolt from the Trump administration will be a kind of like geopolitical shock therapy to wake up some Europeans and, of course, a lot of people in Washington as well. But I think that's kind of the direction that we can see. America's not going to abandon Europe. It's not going to abandon its allies, but it's going to want to reconfigure the relationship. And if the European countries use that as an opportunity to set themselves aright, that'll be good. How this pertains to Hungary, we can talk about it more, but just to put one point on the table, well, the Prime Minister of Hungary has been pressing for just this strategic discourse in Europe. It's been lacking. No one's been talking about it. People have just been dealing with geopolitical imperatives. We have to do this. We have to do that. Our transatlantic system requires us to do X or Y. And the conversation has been lacking. Trump, just by coming into office, is going to force it back on the agenda.
Yeah, and I'm glad for that too. What do you think, Alan?
Well, I mean, I think first is recognizing where Europe is at. And if you go back to, say, 2008, the European economy and the American economy, the EU economy, I should say, and the American economy were basically the same level. And 16 years later, the American economy is worth 25.5 billion and the EU economy is worth 16.6. And so there's been a massive, so it's basically 50%, the American economy is now, I think, 50% bigger basically than the European economy at the time. And the reason why this has happened is Europe has prioritized security over growth, regulation, and so on. And so there's been so economically, Europe has particular reasons why it's fallen behind. And the other thing that's happened is that the European Union and the prevailing mainstream culture in Europe has become quite ideological. And I think what's happened is, with this sort of vibe shift we've been talking about, with the election of Trump, with the election of more conservative parties throughout Europe, what we've seen is the falsification, essentially, in terms of the public will, of the supposed moral and cultural authority of the mainstream elites. And so the question is, can Europe save itself from this precipitous decline? And I think Trump's election gives some courage to people and sets a precedent as well. And I think, we're doing this from the Danube Institute, from Hungary. And one thing I think is that Hungary may not be the biggest country, but it has the advantage of being among the first movers on standing up within the European Union. And Orban was, frankly, quite courageous. Has faced a lot of challenges over the last, he's been in power since 2010 in this version. And it's and I think they've been quite courageous to be the one voice challenging a lot of the neoliberal orthodoxies of the EU. And so now I think Hungary's advantage is not that they're the biggest country, but that they were a first mover. And so therefore people sometimes look to Hungary as a precedent within Europe, or an example of how one might be able to approach things.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm reading right now Michel Houellebecq's latest novel. It's not very good, I'm sorry to say, but I'm a fan of Houellebecq, the French novelist, because he seems to be a prophet of decline, of European spiritual and moral decline. I don't like reading about that, but I think he has his eye on the ball. Do you think this could be the year that Europe becomes something that Houellebecq prophesied a decade ago would happen, that Europe would become nothing but a nostalgic hymn to itself and a theme park to be leased out to rich Chinese and Arabs? I mean, that sounds pretty lurid to put it that way, but I noticed in my travels over the holidays, I would meet Europeans, especially young Europeans, who had a couple of common themes. One, they have no faith in Europe. You know, a lot of them want to go to America, but some of them told me who were conservative, and these are all young people, right? Not older people. They look to Trump for hope because they think it's not anything specific to Trump, but it's that if somebody like Trump can break through and beat the system, then there may be hope for them. I was on Mount Athos in Greece, of all places, right after the New Year. It's the monastic republic there. We picked up this elderly Russian hermit on the side of the road, of a dirt road, to give him a ride. And when he found out that some of us were Americans, he said, "Trump is hope." I don't know if it's going to be hope for the monks on Mount Athos. But I do think it's really interesting to see that people in this continent who have been told for so long that they're bigots, that they're nationalists, neo-fascists, and so on and so forth, finally they have reason to hope that maybe something can change positively for them. Am I wrong?
Well, I think that Europe has a lot of unique features in the geopolitical scene or in the world. The problem is that everything that's happening in Europe right now is bringing out the worst features. It's not helping the European situation. There are some unique conditions that have to be met in order for Europe to flourish. And if we go back to the founding of the European Union, that was part of the idea. Of course, in the modern world where you have one gigantic, basically monolingual, okay, it's English and Spanish, but you got one monolingual power on one side and one monolingual power on the other side. In the case of China, clearly this place which is a patchwork of dozens of countries and very deep history, is going to face some unique challenges. I don't know, take the telecom sector, which isn't united in Europe, or electricity or whatever, all these things which work differently in the American market and the Chinese market operate differently here. But this continent or this part of the Eurasian landmass is not going to work with war. Again, this was the post-war vision, but now European leaders are entangled in a war and happily entangled and want to be more and more entangled in one. It's not going to work with war, and it's not going to work without this broad economic connection to all of the rest of the world. Europe is a place where actually if we dare to say it, the globalization worked a little bit better than it did in the US. It was a different thing. It's a different geography. It's a different place. And, we can even be, I think, skeptical of some of the implications of this and these type of figures about the American GDP. I mean, America is a very, very wealthy country. It also spends a gigantic amount on medical services. It has a very advanced medical sector. But is that really better than? I mean, that's maybe necessary because there is a lot of bad underlying conditions in the American agricultural sector and food supply, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there are other reasons there as well. Do we really want to say that, if only Europe spent like 10 times as much on healthcare, then it would be just as rich as America? I mean, there are problems in the American economy. There wouldn't be Trump without that. It's true that in some parts of the most cutting edge technological industries, America feels much more like a land of opportunity, but there are key elements of the European way of life that are essential. Small agricultural producers, for example, it's a completely different world there from what it is in the United States. So the problem is that Europe has no experience in articulating the conditions of its success in recent years. That language is missing, and hopefully the existence of this very different partner on the other side of the Atlantic, along the Potomac, if you will force it to clarify how it can compete better.
Well, we have to talk about Elon Musk as a political actor in Europe. He's got the European Union bureaucrats completely freaked out. I noticed because of his interview, and it was kind of a lame interview with Alice Weidel of the AfD party in Germany, because he interviewed her the other day on X. Now, so many German institutions announced the next day that they were leaving X entirely. Okay, fine. In Britain, they're talking about the possibility of banning him because he almost single-handedly revived this horrific rape gang scandal for the Pakistani Muslims there. And now it seems to have the potential, at least, to undermine and maybe cause the Starmer government to fall. Something like 75 to 80% of all Britons tell pollsters that they want an official inquiry into what happened. And even a majority of Labour voters do, unlike the Labour Party in Parliament. Talk about Elon Musk as a political player. Is he a threat or is he hope? I tend to see him as more hopeful because he's able to break the media consensus. The media consensus in Germany, for example, pushed the AfD to the side, even though they're the second most popular party in the country. But Musk broke that, and I think that's a good thing. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'd pull back and say, I think there's two things that have happened in the West more generally, and the Anglosphere as well, but and certainly Europe. There's two combined things that have affected us since the war, since World War II, I should say. One is that because of the Nazis' crimes, which are obviously the worst in modern European history, there's been a prevailing sense of shame across, I think, the culture and the continent, where there's a worry of being associated with anything that could in any way be associated with it. Hence, nationalism has been a dirty word for decades by dint of association, and understandably, I think. But there's in combination with that, there's also been an era we've been living through of people always talk about the worry of political extremism, and that was the fear we were all preoccupied with, of worrying about National Socialism returning, and the Germans have been very worried about this. But at the same time, what has actually emerged while we've not been paying attention is not political extremism, but economic extremism. This neoliberal system we've been living under for decades now, since maybe 1980, has, I think, gone a great way to hollowing out the culture, alienating a lot of people. And I think that to link it to the issues Musk's been talking about, the grooming gangs and so on, or the rape gangs in the UK, the one element of that I find often missed out is the circumstances under which those communities were so vulnerable to the exploitation by these gangs. Because these were post-industrial. I'm from the north of England. I don't sound it, but I have a house up there, and I grew up there. And these are, very sort of dystopian communities now, where the social compact and family and community cohesion have completely broken down. So these girls were left very vulnerable, where they had no guidance whatsoever. There was no one. The neighbours were not checking on them. They were, and I'm not blaming them. It's not that sort of argument. But I'm saying there are conditions that allowed this rot to appear and to exist and to thrive like a bacteria or something. And in combination, of course, with the political correctness of the police not engaging with it, which is itself part of the legacy of the crimes of the Nazis, because everyone's fearful of being seen as a racist or something. And so what you've ended up with is this combination, this witch's brew of cultural shame and economic extremism, which have come together to create the conditions not only for things like the grooming gangs, but also actually, quite frankly, if you look at what's been happening the last 2 weeks in the US, all these fires, they seem quite obviously arson, which seems to be probably, I would presume, something to do with social alienation, people who feel they got nothing left to live for, they just watch the world burn. And so if you look at these different factors, it's down to the breakdown of the social sense of solidarity. And it seems to me that where, if you look at someone like Elon Musk, you need to look at what he's saying and the resonance it's having, that he's cutting through the fear of the culture, the cultural norms we've had set around shame and fear of saying anything, but also exposing. But what he's not done is expose the economic extremism.
Right. Well,
I think to some extent, because he's a symptom of that too, actually.
He's not going to do that. But I think that it is a very good thing that he is able, because he's the richest man in the world, he's able to use that power to force conversations into places that they need to go. I mean, look at J.K. Rowling in the UK. She is a liberal, a left-wing voter, but she's been very, very strong defending women's rights against transgenderism because she didn't have to worry about losing all her money by taking this unpopular stand. And she has been vindicated. I think Musk is a similar sort of person. We know that he came out against transgenderism because he had a child who became transgender, and Musk believes that child was deceived by the system and by the liberal system. And I think Musk is the one who amplifies, who both normalizes and amplifies a lot of things that people think of in terms of common sense. Musk right now, you talked about the Los Angeles fires, Musk right now is giving hell to the California politicians who ought to have been cleaning out the brush, who ought to have been funding the fire department and things like that. If not for Elon Musk, who would we have to look to? I'm exaggerating a little bit, but as someone who's been in the mainstream media for most of my career, I can tell you that they are determined not to see things that contradict the narrative.
Yeah. Well, if I may, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Just regarding Elon Musk and his power, I believe he's a very powerful person. Just if we look at the winning speech of President Trump, sorry to say, but Elon Musk, he was talking for the longest time about Elon Musk. So if we compare it, for example, to his family or even the vice president, no, they were of course mentioned, but he spent the biggest amount of the time actually of speaking about Elon Musk. So I believe there is a very strong chemistry between the two gentlemen. What I'm a bit concerned for the future is whether it's possible to actually maintain this strong relationship between such two strong characters, If you have such a big two egos that are rather, I would say, confident, I'm not sure if this chemistry would be able to be, prolonged in such a strong way.
Yeah, I want to be the dissenting voice here a little bit. I've long-standing views on this. I always thought of Musk is for the tech world what Trump is for the real estate world. He's because if you look at Trump's talent, he didn't really build much, but what he was very good at is branding other people's buildings. And Musk is similar. He's a very extremely good marketeer in the context of tech. He wasn't necessarily a founder of the businesses he ran. He's a very good marketeer. And the point is with Musk, though, in terms of culturally, yes, Musk has huge influence because he literally owns the platforms on which the most discussions going on among media elites and so on. So his power is financial. It's not, I don't think, moral. And I think that it's very easy at the moment to critique stupidity because there's a lot of it about all the woke stuff everyone can see, any sensible person, and frankly, most people in private, even if they won't say it publicly, were acknowledging for a long time
that
the point,
it's all gone too far. Alan, you can't say it publicly.
Yeah, but it's true that there's been a breaking of the taboo around acknowledging things, and Musk is, I think, his power has been his financial power to create a platform through which people can challenge these things without fear of ostracism, which is what the real word is for cancellation. I think that's been very powerful. The question now is, now they're in Trump and his allies like Musk are in a governing context, where does the moral authority lie? And I think that I wouldn't necessarily, that there's a slight feverishness around Musk being on someone's side. I don't really think Musk is on anyone's side. I think Musk is on Musk's side. The one thing I'll say with Musk, where he's in a weird way, he's the parallel yet counterweight to Zuckerberg. Musk said things when they were unpopular, but is doing it, I think, for his own advantage. Musk says things when things are unpopular and for his advantage. Zuckerberg says things when they're popular for his own advantage. So Zuckerberg agreed with the Biden administration for years and now has suddenly changed track to be
yes, but don't forget that Elon Musk was also receiving money from the Democrats government.
He was.
Yes.
But
even last week,
Musk has always been willing to say things, and I respect him for this. Whether it's bravery or madness, I don't know. But often he says things that are almost so counterintuitive. You think he must know something. It's like four-dimensional chess. And so my only point is a little bit of caution, I think, around the general feverish sort of optimism about Musk's role. I do think, honestly, that their personalities are so similar. Yeah. My prediction is in this year there will be a massive falling out between the two of them.
There's no space for two presidents.
Yeah, can the European Union or national leaders silence Elon Musk? Do you think they'll try it, and do you think they'll succeed?
No.
There's a difference between silence. No, but the thing is, there's a difference between silencing and ignoring. And I think Musk's voice right now, his financial power of having the platform, has been wedded for now with the political power being close to the president. And as long as his financial power, or who knows if it's going to go away, because Tesla seems very highly valued.
I'm talking about Europe, though.
But in terms of his power in the culture, the reason people listen is not because he's rich, and it's not because he's political. It's because he's both at the same time. That's a delicate balance right now. I'm not confident he can maintain both.
But you cannot ignore him, with his very articulate, messages on social media. I mean, you cannot ignore it because
you can't avoid him, but you can't ignore him.
Okay, no, but what I'm asking is, will the European Union member states, or the Union generally, will it be able to use its delegated powers to silence Elon Musk's platform? Do you think they'll dare to try? And if they do you think they'll succeed? Glad, do you have a view?
Yeah, they can't. And so let's do Musk versus Soros. Everyone on some level assumes that they're basically the same kind of international actor, that they're both very wealthy people who are throwing their political weight around, and especially in Europe. Well, if we wanted to make a kind of difference between them, we could say that Soros tried to astroturf international sentiment in countries. And he did that by exploiting regulatory loopholes. Maybe that's an overlap, we'll see, but really trying to weaponize them. So in Europe, he took the concept of corruption and made that, and he did the same thing in America, took the concept of corruption, and in America, the availability of the elected district attorneys to create a new political weapon or political tool. Mm-hmm. And in the international system, he created a demand for global liberalism by astroturfing think tanks all across the world in places where they offered pretty good money. And so if you're smart and intelligent, you join them and you become a global liberal. If we wanted to try to create a contrast, we could say that Musk is trying to help national sentiment. And there's a question about why he's doing that. So people assume, well, one rich guy pushing his interests, another rich guy pushing his interests. But Musk thus far has been something more like a cooperative or assisting hand. He sees that the liberal interpretation of the democratic system was being weaponized by probably Soros-funded politicians to keep out the AfD in Germany and Rassemblement National in France and all the other right-wing parties. And it was used against Melania for a long time until she broke through. Same with the others. But is he using special tricks and techniques? Is he weaponizing and creating new categories like corruption investigators, like globally appointed corruption investigators or something like that? Well, I mean, he's sort of just using speech. He's not really doing anything unusual. If we wanted to take this a step further, we could say that maybe there's a difference there was in classical thought. I'm not going to go as far as to apply it here, but a difference between oligarchs and aristocrats. And the tech bros, the young, rich tech guys, they are fascinated by aristocracy. They're fascinated by the thought of it. For most of them, it's a kind of dream because they're hoping to exit the companies that they founded and become quasi-aristocrats. But they have a kind of patriotism. So if Elon and Trump can kind of stitch together their interests, because that's also still at play, Musk could become a aristocratic person, not in the way that we previously thought, but in supporting the nation. So, I mean, I agree with the speculations, like, who knows? There are so many different factors here. Once again, we're in kind of uncharted territory in recent years, and everybody's struggling to find the right categories. I mean, I don't know either, but we can kind of guess.
Can I just throw in a quick thought? Yeah, very quick. This distinction is a really good one between aristocratic and oligarchic in a sense, and I think what's interesting, if you look at Soros and Musk, Soros's impact was social because he was able to fund lobbying NGOs that would affect policy and social change institutions and so on. Musk's power is, I don't think he has the interest in that sort of legalistic approach. It's literally just the cultural power, not the social power, the cultural power of him. And it's very interesting because it's this, I think it's a very, very interesting distinction you pointed out. Musk's power is deeply at the cultural level. And there's an interesting question around politics that, if you look at the British Conservative Party, they were in power 14 years. And they had a lot of effect on policy, but almost nothing on the culture. The culture is still very progressive leftist. If you look at Hungary, the government's actually had influence on not just the policy, but also the culture to a great extent. And it's a very interesting, different approach and how you approach it.
If I may just,
go ahead.
Just land. No, please, no. If
But
I won't stop you.
one sentence. But the policies that Soros funded led to anomie. Right, it's like drug legalization, decriminalize everything, don't prosecute anything. The result, a society in which everyone hates one another and hates the world that they live in. And at this point, would any of us confidently say that Elon Musk will not found a colony on Mars? Like, I mean,
I think he won't. But that's
okay. But the point is that back to the hope thing. It's ironic because Obama was the hopey changey guy, but it's Elon who for now is giving a lot of entrepreneurial young people the feeling that, maybe the West is back, maybe America is back.
He's a really classic American figure, the great man of history. What did you say?
No, just wanted to mention one thing, because you ask if Europe is, somehow able to change, or whether Europe should ignore the messages of Elon Musk. If the ground wouldn't be like a sponge, then the messages, I believe, would be going back. But if there's something wrong within the countries itself, with its economies, with the social inequalities, it means that actually these messages maybe can make the citizens more conscious in a way. And I believe Canada is the best example here, because if we look at the economic situation there, the social inequalities under Trudeau were the highest ever. If we look at the research that was ever done, the housing prices, if we look at the flats, nobody can actually afford it, and the prices, for example, of houses in Vancouver were 50% more than in Chicago. But then, the salaries in Chicago are also higher than in Canada. So, this work part is one thing, but if we add this economic situation, then it's totally different. And I believe in Europe, in certain countries, and I believe Germany is the best example. Well, I believe there is a need for a change. I'm not a German citizen, so I will not tell the people for whom they should vote, but I believe the citizens are somehow conscious about the situation, about the economic situation, and the messages that are coming from abroad may even make them more conscious.
We're winding down now, but before I ask the final question, I want to address something to Gladden. You and I are both personal friends of J.D. Vance, the incoming vice president. I could not be more excited about the fact that he has gone so far so fast. And one of the reasons I was most excited to support Trump this time, even though I've never been a big Trump fan, but I was absolutely on his side this time, not only because the system had to be rejected, the Biden system, but because I see this next Trump administration as a gateway to a Vance presidency, because I know his character, I believe in this man, and I believe he could be a Reagan of his generation. What do you think?
Look how they tried to demonize him right after he was picked. They said, Waltz is a so much better choice because Waltz is the true populist. Wow, JD struggled. He's probably going to lose Trump, Ohio. He's not going to deliver a sweep of the Midwest. He's weird. They had all this framing built up. They tried as much as they could to put so that when you finally saw JD in action, you would read it through all of these liberal coded things. And in the debate, he just broke right through it. And we're just seeing the beginning, I think, because he's been planning for the new administration. He was at the rallies and things like that, but he hasn't really been deployed that much. He's done a couple of talk shows. But just wait. When he is out there every single day, clearly explaining what the administration is doing, I think it's going to have a devastatingly good effect. And I think he's been the inspiration for a lot of the talent acquisition that the Trump 2.0, the Trump Redux has been able to succeed at. Looks like it's succeeding at. You know, it's a tough ask to get people to go to Washington nowadays, because it's been such a seedbed of iniquity, political iniquity, for so long. But we'll see what happens with the administration, obviously. But there are a lot of young people who, when they see JD and Trump 2.0, they're ready to sign up.
Yeah, because he's real. I mean, his story is known by everybody because of his great book, Hillbilly Elegy, and he's a serious Catholic. I was there when he was received into the church, and even though I'm an ex-Catholic, I can take some pride in having introduced him to the Dominican who began his catechesis. And I can't say enough good things about him, so I'm hoping for the best there. Last question before we say goodbye. Give us at least one striking thing you think will happen in 2025. Callum?
I do think that I also am a big fan of JD Vance, and he is the vice president. I think in the period when we've not had the presidency hasn't started yet, it's been, I think Musk has had this prominent position. Musk is too strong a character and too too similar to Trump, I think, for them to stay close together. But Vance has, I think, what he has is discipline and self-possession, which I think will be the marathon, not the sprint sort of approach. And I think my prediction is Trump and Musk will have a bad falling out, and we'll see Vance return to the public sphere in a way that he's not been very visible for a few weeks. That's my general sense.
Trump and Musk falling out. What do you think, Liliana?
Well, I'm not a witch. I assume. I can talk about my hopes. Let's say what I believe that might happen when the President Trump will come into the office. I hope he will be able to actually stop the war in Ukraine. I know it might sound not very realistic, but I hope with his power and also with his influence on certain issues, he will be able to stop it. Because at the end of the day, in the European Union, even if the leaders are not expressing it, I believe nobody actually wants the war. And I think the problem is that the leaders actually, they don't want to say that Prime Minister Viktor Orban was right in certain topics, because now they cannot say it. But with this, he was right, and I hope that with this component and with the Trump in power, the war will be over.
Gladden?
I don't know if you got the notification during the last hour. I mean, I thought this was going to be a prediction, but actually, Governor Ron DeSantis is naming Melania Trump as the next senator from the state of Florida.
You're serious?
What? No.
Wait, serious or not?
No. Well, these are predictions.
It could have happened. You think that's going to happen?
It could have happened. Well, we're definitely going to see the return of Melania this year. I mean, in the first administration, they didn't put her on the cover of any magazine. She was never on Vogue. They never showed the pictures of the White House. You had to follow the Instagram account in order to see what they were doing at the White House Christmas decoration and so on and so forth. And they tried so hard to make, wouldn't want to say anything negative about the other first ladies from the other party, but let's just say they were trying to create style icons where they didn't really exist. And this time, just like Trump can't be ignored, I think Melania will be back.
Be best again.
Be best.
Again.
Be best. Be best.
Again.
I think that by this time next year, we will all be shocked by how reasonable and even wise the U.S. acquisition of Greenland will sound. It sounds nuts today, but I think Trump will continue pushing this, and we will have a strange new respect for American imperialism in Greenland.
Well, as a part Canadian, I'm also looking forward to my dual citizenship with America.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Pierre Poilievre and Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, what an impressive guy he
But
is.
then the public healthcare will be in the US, or how it will be resolved? I'm just
I was
wondering.
wondering about
Good
that.
Lord, we'll be
Because,
here forever.
But also,
State-level
if you go to
systems. We have state-level systems,
But also,
so
if
we can
Greenland
incorporate it.
if Greenland's taken over by the States, do you end up with a Greenland card? This is the question.
Oi, oi, oi. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us on View from the Danube. I'm Rod Dreher. We'll see you next time.